So I'm going to read actually the end of this book, The Passion of the Western Mind by Richard Tarnas. It's one of my favorite books. And going to pretty much start with his conclusion, which is called Bringing It All Back Home. I won't read it all, I'll just read certain parts of it. Many generalizations could be made about the history of the Western mind, but today perhaps the most immediately obvious is that it has been from start to finish an overwhelmingly masculine phenomenon. Socrates, Plato, Newton, Hume, Nietzsche, Freud, etc., etc. The Western intellectual tradition has been produced and canonized almost entirely by men, and informed mainly by male perspectives. This masculine dominance in Western intellectual history has certainly not occurred because women are any less intelligent than men. But can it be attributed solely to social restriction? I think not. I believe something more profound is going on here, something archetypal. The masculinity of the Western mind has been pervasive and fundamental in both men and women, affecting every aspect of the Western thought, determining its most basic conception of the human mind and the human role in the world. It's always been man this, man that, the ascent of man, the dignity of man, man's relation to God. The man of the Western tradition has been a questing masculine hero. This masculine predisposition in the evolution of the Western mind, though largely unconscious, has not been only characteristic of that evolution, but essential to it. For the evolution of the Western mind has been driven by a heroic impulse to forge an autonomous, rational human self by separating it from the primordial unity with nature. What does that mean, primordial unity with nature? So he's saying basically that the feminine sees itself more as a part of nature, maybe that the feminine is not so much differentiated from nature. And I think his point is really that humanity was not really differentiated from nature until the quest of the Western mind, basically. So the big project of the West, which has taken several thousand years, has been to separate from this primordial unity. I think not saying for the purpose of separating is not implying there's anything bad about it, but implying that something else can be achieved as well. Okay? So, let's see. So all these quests have served the cause of evolving the autonomous human will and intellect, the transcendent self, the independent individual ego, the self-determining human being in its uniqueness, separateness, and freedom. So, say, if you go back several thousand years, then humanity really was sort of living within nature. There was no sense of sort of being above nature, and there was very little in terms of seeing oneself as an independent, autonomous being. So that is what he's saying this several thousand years was all about. But, okay, the evolution of the Western mind has been founded on the repression of the feminine, on the repression of undifferentiated unitary consciousness, of the participation mystique with nature, a progressive denial of the anima mundi, of the soul of the world, of the community of being, of the all-pervading, of mystery and ambiguity, of imagination, emotion, instinct, body, nature, woman. Are these things bad? No. But this separation necessarily calls forth a longing for a reunion with that which has been lost, especially after the masculine heroic quest has been pressed to its utmost one-sided extreme in the consciousness of the late modern mind, which means us, which in its absolute isolation has appropriated to itself all conscious intelligence in the universe. Basically, now, according to our science and so on, humans are the only conscious beings, the only beings with purpose and meaning, and everything else is essentially inert, right? No meaning, no thought. So now mankind faces the psychological and biological crisis of living in a world that has come to be shaped in such a way that it precisely matches his worldview, i.e., that is, in a man-made environment that is increasingly mechanistic, atomized, soulless, and self-destructive. The crisis of modern man is an essentially masculine crisis, and I believe that its resolution is already now occurring in the tremendous emergence of the feminine in our culture. So we went out on a limb there for 4,000 or 5,000 years, but we're coming back. And this is the time. Reintegration. But in theory, on a higher level. As Jung prophesied, an epochal shift is taking place in the contemporary psyche, a reconciliation between the two great polarities, a unity of opposites, between the long dominant but now alienated masculine and the long suppressed but now ascending feminine. And this dramatic development is not just a compensation, not just a return of the repressed, as I believe this has all along been the underlying goal of Western intellectual and spiritual evolution. For the deepest passion of the Western mind has been to reunite with the ground of its own being. Does that mean that Western civilization, if we can call it that, was founded with this purpose in mind? I don't think it was the purpose in the conscious mind of the individuals who founded Western civilization. But I think we'll find that purpose is deeper. There is a collective, almost an unconscious purpose that we don't know about. So clearly, even though if we were really pressed, we might be able to find it. But anyway, so let's continue. But to achieve this reintegration of the repressed feminine, the masculine must undergo a sacrifice, an ego death. The Western mind must be willing to open itself to a reality the nature of which could shatter its most established beliefs about itself and about the world. This is where the real act of heroism is going to be. And this is the great challenge of our time, the evolutionary imperative for the masculine to see through and overcome its hubris and one-sidedness, to own its unconscious shadow, to choose to enter into a fundamentally new relationship of mutuality with the feminine in all its forms. The feminine then becomes not that which must be controlled, denied, and exploited, but rather fully acknowledged, respected, and responded to for itself. It's amazing. But why has the pervasive masculinity of the Western intellectual and spiritual tradition suddenly become so apparent to us today, while it remains so invisible to almost every previous generation? I believe this is occurring only now because, as Hegel suggested, Hegel being a philosopher, a civilization cannot become conscious of itself, cannot recognize its own significance until it is so mature that it is approaching its own death. Today, we are experiencing something that looks very much like the death of modern man. Indeed, that looks very much like the death of Western man. Perhaps the end of man himself is at hand, but man is not a goal. Man is something that must be overcome and fulfilled in the embrace of the feminine. good stuff.